Welcome to the Growth Fire Podcast, where we engage with top business leaders who share their experiences and provide real insights that help them attract customers, retain staff, and grow their bottom line. Now, let's get started with the show. Hello there. I'm Mark Reifenrath, the host of the show, where I feature inspiring business leaders from various backgrounds and industries willing to share their perspectives on healthy cultures and motivated teams. Past guests have included Kara Golden, the founder of Hint. That episode just launched recently. It's really awesome. She had some great stories to share and some very inspiring leadership anecdotes that I think will be great for all of you. This episode is brought to you by Spinutech. Spinutech is a premium digital growth agency that specializes in revitalizing lead generation strategies and accelerating online sales for top brands. To learn more, go to spinutech.com. Today, we have a great guest, Elizabeth Zucker. She's from the YPO St. Louis chapter, is the managing director at Interior Investments of St. Louis, LLC. Through a hub and spoke business model and Elizabeth's leadership, Interior Investments of St. Louis has grown to a $25 million dealership. From its inception, Interior Investments has achieved tremendous annual growth, is virtually debt-free, and has solidified itself as the second largest Miller Knoll dealer and one of the most sophisticated and fastest growing contract furniture dealers with 4 locations. She joined YPO in 2007. Elizabeth quickly became involved, holding more than 9 chapter officer roles. In 2014, she joined the Central U.S. Regional Executive Committee and served in various roles, including serving as the Central U.S. Regional Chair. In July 2016, Elizabeth became a member of the YPO Board of Directors. In 2019, Elizabeth was elected as the YPO Global Chairman for 19 and 20. She has 3 children, Graham, Henry, and Julia. Elizabeth, that is a colored background with YPO especially. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for having me.
All right, we were just talking about this. You had a little bit of forewarning, but my favorite question I love to ask, both for when we're interviewing prospects and on the podcast, is when you wake up in the morning, you're walking to your desk, what's that walk-up song playing in your head every morning?
So I would say Dancing Queen for many reasons. One, because my mom tortured me by playing ABBA over and over and over again as a kid in the car. And it's the one song that I probably could actually relate to. But it always makes me smile and feel my best.
That's awesome. That's got some attitude. It picks you up, gets you going. That's some good energy for the day, depending on what you got to do. So I love it. All right. So you've been in YPO a long time. I would love to understand, which is great. I think you probably got in younger than most people probably did. So that's awesome because you got the cheat code, as I like to think of YPO. You got access to the cheat codes sooner. So how did you discover YPO? Where were you at in your career journey and kind of what was the intro to that?
Yeah. So I joined YPO when I was 31. And I would say at the time in which I joined YPO, it was very unusual to join via the portal, which is ypo.org. I went out and Googled leadership organizations. I was just leaving Herman Miller, the manufacturer that I distribute for today, and had bought into a business. And I'd moved back to St. Louis where I grew up, and none of my high school friends were running businesses. I didn't know anyone who was running a business, and I was looking for some sort of peerdom to bounce ideas off of other local leaders. And I just Googled leadership organizations. I filled out an application, and 3 weeks later, somebody reached out to me. Now, ironically, I knew many of the members that are in the local chapter in St. Louis, but I didn't know that they were YPOers. And so I'm one of those random people who found it all on my own.
That is pretty unique. And so when you found this, how long did you own the business before you realized you needed that resource?
2 years.
Yeah. And then you find out it's pretty lonely at the top. It's hard to have conversations. Like a lot of others don't necessarily understand the pains you're going through. And so how quickly did you get into a forum once you joined?
I got into a forum pretty quickly. So I've actually been in 3 forums over my 17-year journey in YPO. The first one was a chapter-based forum. It was probably, 10 years younger than the next member that was in the forum. They had kids in college and teenagers, and I was still having babies. And I honestly, our business would not be where it is today if it weren't for that forum in particular. There were two acquisitions that we made during the time frame in which I was in that forum. And I don't think I would have had the courage to do it if it hadn't been for them, because they were so much deeper into their careers. They had bought and sold businesses. They had multiple partners throughout their careers. And so they really gave me, I think, the chutzpah or the courage to be willing to take a risk and just realize that everything was going to work out one way or another and that there was really no downside.
So, when you say there was a 10-year gap, I could perceive that as a good thing or a bad thing. It sounds like you really took that as a real big positive, because that, like you said, the life stages sometimes can be a little bit of a challenge of, I'm not really getting any value because I can't relate to anybody that's got a kid in college. Like, that's not on my radar. I'm still trying to sleep through the night and change diapers and keep my sanity. But you were able to find the power of their experiences, it sounds like, and really kind of maybe accelerate some decisions and confidence to make some big things happen.
Well, it's interesting because now I'm on the reverse end of the spectrum. So I'm in my third forum and I'm the granny in the forum. I'm much older. There's people having babies in my forum, and my oldest is going off to college next year. And two of my three kids can drive. And I just remember people always saying to me, and I always would kind of frown when they would say, big people, big problems, little people, little problems, because at the time, the issues that my really young children had seemed massive to me. And now I know exactly what they were talking about. So I have experienced two different forums on both ends of a spectrum of 17 years. And it's interesting. I think I received more from the initial forum experience when I was learning so much from a business and personal perspective from people that were 5 to 15 years my senior. But it's also really rewarding to be on the other end, giving back, where you have that perspective in your business. Many of my current forum mates haven't been in their roles for very long at all. The excitement they have, the energy is contagious, and it rubs off on me, which I greatly appreciate. And just hearing that they're just and many of them are just transitioning into their roles. And so that's exciting and fun to be able to contribute my experience and share and help them learn and grow, I think, or I hope. But I learn equally as much from them. It's just different.
Yeah. That's awesome.
And then I actually started an all-female member forum. I have a terrible problem. I cannot say no to anything YPO. And so somebody reached out to me, a woman by the name of Jane Hardy, who is a really accomplished member in the YPO Bluegrass chapter. She at the time was running the Women's Business Network, which is a group of virtual network of female members. And they were trying to start a new product of all female member-based forums. Many of them were virtual, but there were enough women residing in St. Louis that I actually started one here. And it's interesting, of that forum, which I'm no longer in, 3 of them are my very best friends in the world. So it was extremely, extremely rewarding from an experience perspective.
That's awesome. And I'm going to guess, I know that there's been a big push to get more female members in the last couple of years, which has been awesome. I know that I was just at the Global Marketing Summit and there was a strong contingent of women there that I thought was great. When you joined, though, I'm going to guess that it wasn't where there was a lot fewer. So you were definitely more isolated in that regard.
There were times in which, so when I started on the global board, the years I was on there were 3 years I was the only female of 24 directors. On my chapter board, I was the only female almost the entire time I ever served. On the regional board, I was the only female member. We had spouse partners, of course, contributing in a very intentional and meaningful way. And in much of my career, but honestly, I'm trying to remember, I think YPO was at about 6%, 7% female when I joined. We're over 14, I believe, today, which is a massive improvement when you actually consider, specifically in the US, where we're the oldest. The chapters have been around for so very long. We have a lot of male Caucasian members, and nobody ever leaves this extraordinary membership organization. And so everybody's living longer. We have such low attrition.
Yeah.
That it's very hard to move the needle with any type of diversity because you always have the past sitting out there. And we had so few females probably for the first 50 years of YPO.
Yeah. No, I think it's awesome, the growth and getting that integrated into forums. I think that's awesome that you really pushed and help grow some of that as well.
It's easier to recruit women, by the way, when you're a woman, because they
For
can't give you
sure.
excuses and say they're too busy and they don't have time or they have too many children or so it's an interesting. I like it. I love recruiting women to YPO.
That's great. So let's stay focused kind of on your career path for a moment with YPO. So do you have an example of, like, as leaders, when we get some challenging spots that we get put in, is there a situation you could share, how your forum really helped, and as I say, the cheat code, how they really gave you some options to think of it differently, or some solutions that saved you, a month or 2 months of not trying to find the answer a different way?
From a business perspective in
Yeah,
forum.
yeah, and it could, I guess, well, it could be personal, family too, if that's easier.
I think I think my forum was probably the most instrumental throughout my divorce, honestly, which would be professional and personal,
Mhm.
because of course you have the ugly side, which is the division of assets. I am one of those fortunate people. I think I can't think of the last time I went somewhere and I didn't run into somebody and they always tell me that my ex-husband and I are the role model for a divorced couple because we didn't fight when we were married and we don't fight divorced and our kids always come first. But when it came to the division of assets, specifically my ownership in the business, I feel like sadly, I had a lot of experience in my forum that could be shared, but I feel like I got really solid counsel. Now, I think you have to really look at who you are, your relationship, and do what's right for you. But hearing other people's experiences, of course, is always a really great way to learn without making mistakes of your own. And I think I really appreciated not just their experience, but also that they looked out for me and that they
Yeah.
took care of me through that period and made sure that I had the support and the friendships that I needed to be successful longer term.
I'm actually glad you chose a personal kind of slash professional one, because I think as leaders, and this is why YPO is so powerful, if we're imbalanced in one of those three categories, then none of them really work well, right? And so that's the power of YPO, though, is you can truly, like, some forums are really more focused on personal and family, even though it's all business people. But they know that that's the area they need to work on most. And some are really, 80% business and 20%. And it's every forum is a little different in their makeup, but
Absolutely.
I think that it's important that we're balancing all those areas. And those things can also be difficult for a leader to talk to others about, because they don't want to admit some of the personal struggles that they might have. So that's really, really great. Okay, so you said you can't say no to anything. I can relate to that. I just got asked to be on something else for YPO, and I think I replied in 10 seconds of getting the email. I was like, yes, I'm in. Not even really fully knowing what I'm all going to have to do with it, but that's my passion I have for YPO as well. So when you kind of started to, I'll say, climb the ranks within YPO of some of the leadership stuff, what did you learn? What was the addiction there, maybe, of why you wanted to continue to serve and even get more on a global level? Because that's a big responsibility.
Honestly, um, membership is the role that I enjoy the most in YPO. And so I've had the opportunity to serve in membership roles intermittently throughout that 17-year period. So I was, of course, the membership officer in my original chapter, ended up on the global membership committee for a chunk of time where you're getting into the brass tacks of setting the membership criteria, what defining what a peer is, how long somebody needs to be tenured in the organization in order to receive grace, kind of all the nitty gritty. And then, of course, now I'm on the backside of all of my global contributions to YPO, and I'm on my second year of serving as a membership officer back in my chapter. Now, my chapter has 190 plus members. It is
Huge.
extremely large. I think the fifth largest in the U.S. I'm sorry, in the world, one of the largest in the U.S. as well. And it just wasn't very diverse. And I don't define diversity as gender or race. I define diversity as you weren't born in St. Louis. Maybe English isn't your first language. You're an entrepreneur, because our chapter was very
Mm.
originally family business heavy, but then essentially became somewhat uh, hired gun heavy as well.
Hmm.
And I just think of industry diversity, anybody who would give diversity of thought, because for me, what makes YPO extraordinary is diversity of thought, diversity of experience. If you're around a bunch of people that are homogeneous or just like you, I don't think you grow and you learn. And I don't think you
Yeah.
can be your best self. But the reason why I did it was I'm a connector of people above all else. And the more opportunities you put yourself, the more chances you take, the more times you put yourself into a situation where you're actually meeting other people. I'm like a virtual Rolodex for YPO, and I love connecting people. I love hearing people's stories, learning about what they're looking for, and then asking if I can introduce them to a couple of people that I know that they would absolutely hit it off with. And because I've had so many opportunities to meet so many YPOers over the last 17 years, it's super fun for me to take two people I love and introduce them to each other.
That's awesome. So, okay, I couldn't agree more with all of that. I mean, like I said, the event I just went to, I made 20, 30 new connections, and I was the
So
full week
fun.
afterwards, I'm emailing and calling and texting and setting up follow-up conversations and everything. And that's so cool. I already signed up for next year's event because I want to get right back to it. Do you have, maybe relating back to your professional career, having been surrounded by, I'll say, a pretty elite group of leaders when you kind of get to that global level and serving at that level, what are some leadership maybe theories or things that you learned that you picked up on at that level that you were able to bring back to your business?
I think the thing that probably influenced me and my leadership style the most, and this actually came directly from one of the folks that's worked for me for 12 years. Recently, we were on a kind of challenge. We were having kind of a somewhat challenging conversation via Zoom with one of our very largest customers, and the end user was giving my account manager a pretty rough time. And so after we got off the call, he said, 7 or 8 years ago, you would have been the bully. You would have been the one pushing the conversation. He said, I couldn't believe how patient you were. You allowed him to speak. You listened very intentionally. And then you started to influence the conversation very discreetly in the direction you wanted to take it. That skill absolutely came from my experience in serving and leading the YPO Global Board. The biggest component of that was that it wasn't a bunch of Americans. It was people from all parts of the world who have grown up in different, one, English wasn't their first language. And I can't imagine how hard it would be. Maybe English was your third or fourth language to speak intelligently in front of a group of peers about topics you're super emotional about and finding the right words. I mean, if you think when you're speaking a foreign language, you think of basic words, but when it's your native language, there might be 10 adjectives that describe something, and picking the right one influences the way everyone else thinks about whatever it is you're sharing.
Mm.
And so I think it made me become a very active listener, and also give people a lot more grace than I probably did earlier in my career. And the idea of influencing versus telling, taking a totally non-authoritative approach, because of course in YPO, everybody there is a volunteer. They're all CEOs leading their own businesses, and none of them are going to tolerate being told what to do. And so the art of influence and maybe, I don't know if you want to call it herding cats, but getting everybody to build consensus around an idea, and then also be super, super aware of the fact that somebody in that room might have a better idea
Mm.
or a better way to solve the problem, and that it doesn't have to be your way. It could actually be much more meaningful to allow it to be someone else's way of solving it. So I think that skill set has really paid off for me in my business, because I got in the habit of really influencing and building consensus around anything I wanted to accomplish in YPO.
I love that. I'm a big believer in that too. I think as leaders, in our early career, we have to be a little bit louder and a little bit more forceful. But over time, when you are the person, when you're the CEO, the leader of the organization, the sooner we speak, the sooner we shut down new ideas. And so I think, translating a little bit what you said, I'm a big believer with my leadership team. I should never be the first one to share my thoughts and ideas because I'm
Correct.
instantly influencing what they're going to share with me. And I always say, I'm paying you guys a lot of money. I want your ideas. I expect your ideas. I expect you to challenge us. And so you've got to build that freedom. And so listening is great, both internally and externally. So that's a really, really good one. Thanks for sharing that. Um,
Absolutely.
okay. So global level, you were right up into 2020. So did you have to deal with any of the, the impact of the GLC getting canceled and everything? Where I had interviewed formerly Scott Mordell and Sean Magenis, who both talked about this. So you were, I'm guessing, kind of right up to that as well.
Well, so I woke up, we had a board meeting on the front end of the GLC in San Diego. And I woke up to a text, and I'm a very early riser. Obviously, it was on Pacific time. I probably woke up 5 a.m. Pacific time, maybe earlier. And it was Scott Mordell, he at the time was the current CEO of YPO. And he's like, hey, any chance we could meet in the lobby in the next 30 minutes? I was like, absolutely. So I threw on some workout clothes, and I remember the two of us just sitting in two lounge chairs in the lobby of the hotel and having a conversation about whether we should or shouldn't cancel the GLC. And we knew we needed to make the decision immediately without a lot of metrics or information, because in a matter of maybe 6, 8 hours, folks that lived maybe, in Southeast Asia, North Asia, were going to be hopping on planes and heading to San Diego. And if we could catch them before they actually boarded their flights, it was a much more gracious out. We both had been receiving a constant barrage of very aggressive emails from members pleading with us to cancel. Some pleaded with us not to cancel. So it was a little bit of a mixed bag, but probably the more passionate folks were the ones, or members, who really thought that it was not prudent to carry on. And I think the deciding factor for Scott and myself in that moment was, what was our social responsibility? And we know our culture as an organization. We are not fist bumpers, elbow bumpers. We are huggers and kissers. And the likelihood of us transmitting the virus was so high. And if you just looked at the sheer number of people that were going to be together coming from all different continents in a moment in time, it would have been almost impossible to imagine that it couldn't become a super spreader event.
Yeah.
And we thought about the fact that if one of us went home and had elderly parents or grandparents or an employee that was immunocompromised and somebody died because we thought it was more important to train champions or listen to global leaders on a stage and socialize, it just seemed like a really selfish decision in that
Yeah.
moment. It was a very expensive decision
Mm-hmm.
to decide to cancel, which we did not take lightly, because that's our members' money. And it's our responsibility to guard it with our lives and make sure we're using it as prudently as humanly possible. Now, the good news is we have really, really good lawyers, and we had a force majeure clause that we were actually able to enforce in almost all cases. And so we either received a credit or a refund in many, many, many cases. And I would say once we made that tough decision to cancel, 98% of our members and spouse partners were extraordinarily supportive of that decision. And the ones who weren't were just incredibly disappointed with the missed opportunity.
Yeah. That's a tough
Because we
one.
love to be together.
Yes, you said it too a little bit, but one of the things that Scott talked about and Sean was using your core values and the culture to make that decision. And I think that's awesome when, I'm a big believer in we have 4 core values, and that's one of the core ways we make decisions. When you have a problem, you use the core values to solve it. Which one is it misaligned with, or does it challenge? And so I love that was a factor into your decision making. And not an easy one either.
Well, I think EO, which is a sister organization, they also have a GLC. I think theirs was going to be in South Africa, somewhere else, not in the North America. And I remember the global chairman of EO reached out to me as soon as it, had leaked out that we were canceling. And he said, "Can you share the data and the metrics? Do you have a report that led to the board's decision?" And sadly, I said, I don't have any information or data. I said it was a conversation between Scott Mordell and myself about our core values and what was right and what we felt, what we could sleep at night with. And it wasn't based on any metrics. Now, of course, in hindsight, we got super lucky. We looked like heroes
Yeah.
after the fact because we were right on the edge of when it broke loose. And there were many people who had already arrived who ended up testing positive
Oh man.
for COVID-19. So we got so lucky. It was also, I believe, the same week of that super spreader event at the biotech firm that was in Boston. So I think without a doubt, we would have probably had an adverse effect on many
Yeah.
of our loved ones and our employees because we just can't elbow bump and fist bump. I mean, it's just not who we are.
Totally. So I'm going to bring
And
it back.
nobody would have worn a mask.
No, masks weren't even a thing yet. I'm going to bring it back to work there for a minute. So that example of you use your core values to make a decision, is that something you've always believed, or is that something you've learned from some of your leadership positions with YPO? And then kind of the second part to that is, do you have an example in your business where you've used your core values and your culture to make a decision?
I think it bleeds into my personal and professional life. I was raised in a household where ethics and values were extremely important and honesty always came first.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that I instill that in my three children on a daily basis. I always, I'm like any parent say, like, if you just tell me the truth, the consequence will be so much less severe.
Yeah.
But when somebody lies to me, I have so little patience. I need all of the information that you have up front. And I think that's the exact same professionally. When something goes south with an end user or a client or a partner of ours, if folks are able to paint an honest picture of the situation and be open to having a dialogue about what the best way to solve it is, I feel like you can always graciously have a very difficult conversation with anyone and have meaning. But if you get blindsided or you go in thinking you know everything or you're aggressive, I feel like the outcome is never as good. So
Yeah, agreed. I had a great example recently. I really preach this to our leadership team that this is how we make our decisions. And one of our core values is we do the right thing. And there was a sticky situation with a client, and I was processing. I was getting the information. I'm just being quiet processing. I needed some time to process, but I started to just listen to the team talk through it. And they're like, well, we do the right thing. That's our second core value. And so I feel like we've got to tell this person this right away and tell that person this right away. And by the time they were done, I was like, well, I didn't even need to process anymore. They've got this figured out, and they used our core values. And, did it have a little bit of suck in it for us? Yeah, it did, because it wasn't a great situation, but it was the right thing. And I'm a big believer that you do that long term, it's going to be a benefit to you and all involved. So it's one of those good situations.
I recently hired someone from one of our competitors, and she was just sharing yesterday that her previous employer had made a mistake that wasn't transparent to the end user, and so then they knew they were going to be upside down on a really substantial piece of work, and so they changed the team that was on there so they could recover some of their losses. And I said, well, did they ever go back to the client and actually disclose that they had just made a mistake and ask if maybe they would be willing to meet them in the middle to keep them semi-whole? Oh, no, I would never do, because that's what I would have done. I would have said, hey, listen, my problem, not yours. We'll suck it up either way, but any chance you want to share in our pain. But what they did adversely affected their relationship with that very large client. And as a result, we've picked up a ton more work from them because they didn't put their best foot forward. They didn't give it their all. They didn't have a great team supporting a really significant opportunity. And they were just trying to save a buck. And in the long run, they probably lost so much more because they weren't open, honest, and transparent. And they didn't, to your point, they didn't do the right thing, right? The right thing would have been, you made a mistake, suck it up.
So I call those situations setting the timer. You can either, so with the client, and we're in related businesses kind of, as far as service, we're very service oriented, right? if you do
Absolutely.
something and you don't address it, there's an imbalance in value or something, and you don't address it,
Correct.
setting that timer. And it could be 6 months, it could be 3 years, but regardless, the timer's been set and you can't really turn that back because you've changed the trust balance on some level when they do discover that or start to question the value of what you're bringing. And so I'm always preaching to our team, like, let's don't set the timer. Don't ever put ourselves in a position where we're creating an opportunity for them to think they don't need us or think that, here's a reason we shouldn't be working with Spinutech. And it's a pretty simple thing, and it's hard to stay perfect, but when we're human, we're going to make mistakes, and I think that's, as a leader, I want to make sure we fail fast or fail first attempt in learning, and you want to learn from it, and sometimes that includes the client being involved in that learning process of saying, how do we be better partners? How do we be, we made a mistake, we want to be very transparent what happened, we want to talk to you about how we make sure this doesn't happen again, because likely both sides played a little part in it.
For
Both
sure.
sides don't always want to admit that, but it's a good learning opportunity to understand that.
I think sometimes too, depending on how you were raised or what situations you've been in previously, either confrontation or kind of owning the truth is sometimes really hard. I mean, it forces vulnerability, right? Which gets back to YPO, right? So if you're completely comfortable putting it all out there, you
Mm-hmm.
never know how gracious a client or a vendor might be. Everybody makes mistakes. And on the flip side, when you have a client who's made a mistake and you're in a position to give or help, it always pays off tenfold because it deepens your connection or your relationship because there's an appreciation for your willingness to help alleviate whatever the situation is. And so I think that's a big one for us within the organization is I always laugh. I mean, this seems very punitive, but at some point, you think about what do you approve that in our world, it would be like a cost no sell, a mistake that gets costed against an order that doesn't have a gross profit margin on it. And I always ask, it's 100% our fault. We're never going to go back to the client and ask them to share in our pain. Did you ask our vendor if they had any additional discounting? The answer is almost always no. I was like, well, why not? I mean, what do you have to lose? This is worst case scenario. It's not going to get worse by asking. I'd
Right.
say 99% of the time they give us something more.
Yeah. Why not? That's a good
Why
example.
not? Because it makes us, I mean, the next time you go and specify something, you're going to go back to the vendors that have your back. I mean,
100%.
that's them building credibility in a relationship and continuity with us. But it's funny that, you have to then, you have to be willing to admit you made a mistake.
Right. Right.
And not
I do
placing any
think
blame on them. I just made a mistake. Any chance you can help me out?
I would say YPO is helpful with that in the sense of we all make mistakes. And I think as leaders, you often don't want to admit them. But in those forums, that's a lot of what you're talking about is a mistake was made. And so,
Almost
how do
always.
you fix it? How do you avoid it? How do you, learn from it? And so I know for me, it's probably gotten easier for me to own some of that. Having witnessed other people, maybe sharing how they've dealt with it and bringing some of my own mistakes to that group. And something I've learned to say is, when I present to my forum, I always say, this is my side of the story. Please understand
Oh,
there's
for
always
sure.
another side. So and I always ask them, like, tell me what I'm missing. Tell me what I'm maybe being too arrogant about, or, my ego is getting in the way here. Cause I don't think it is, but that's my perspective. And
Right.
so, that personal board of directors, you really want them to challenge you and call your BS when you got it.
I
Um,
agree.
Awesome. All right. What about an only in YPO experience? If there's one that's like not YPO confidential, like what's one of the best only in YPO experiences you've had?
This is a hard one for me because I have had so many. Well, I'll share two. One of the coolest experiences I had was right after I got elected as the global chairman. We were in Cape Town, South Africa, and the next speaker for the GLC was going to be the president of Rwanda, Paul Kagame. And Paul Kagame is known for being very, very, he's pushed a ton of diversity on his cabinet and in the government. I think he had a goal of making it 50% female leaders. And so, of course, when he was there, he's in the green room. There's three other global chairmen, one of which was going to interview him. And his press secretary comes out and she finds me she said, are you Elizabeth Zucker? And I said, I am. She said, you're the next chairman, right? I said, I am. And I had just gotten elected like 2 days before that. And she said, well, President Kagame would like to spend some time with you. Could you come back to the green room? And I was like, sure, absolutely. And of course I felt so honored. And so the other gentlemen in the room were trying to steer the conversation. They were trying to prep him, get him comfortable with what they were going to be asking him on the big stage, right? He wanted to tell me about his kids that were in university, and one went to Purdue. I can't remember where the other one went. They were both in engineering schools in the US. Talked about how he was trying to get home earlier because he wanted to read bedtime stories to his youngest son. He wanted to spend time talking about his personal life and how his role as the president of Rwanda was affecting his life balance.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, he didn't feel like he could have that conversation with the extremely accomplished gentlemen that were in that room, who really wanted to focus on what they wanted to talk about for the members and the spouse partners that were going to be in that auditorium in a few short moments. And I just thought it was really cool that he sought me out. It certainly made me realize the magnitude, not only of the responsibility, but the incredible opportunity I had been given, and being elected as the chairman. One of the other pieces that I probably appreciate the most relates to my kids. So the very first global board meeting that we went to in July, our global board meeting is what we call a family global board meeting. So they create programming for your children while the member is in the board meeting all day. And it was in Hong Kong. And so I thought, well, gosh, let's go to mainland China, go to Beijing and Xi'an before we go to Hong Kong. I don't know if I'll ever have the opportunity to take my 3 children to China. And they had an experience. I don't think they've ever felt like a minority living in the US. Racially, gender, non-native English speaking, whatever. They have never felt like a minority. It started when we happened to choose Canaan Airlines. Started when we were boarding the plane, and my middle son, Henry's like, why is everybody bumping me? Why do they keep butting and pushing, mommy? And I'm like, you have to butt and push when you live in a country like China. I mean, we were probably the only Caucasians on that plane. And to get somewhere, to get what you need, to feed your family, to whatever, you don't have the luxury of not getting your elbows out in many cases. They learned so many things firsthand on that trip. I will never forget being in a closed vehicle with our tour guide, getting ready to go into Tiananmen Square. And my 6-year-old daughter asked her why I think she had one child, and they had just recently changed the rules around birth in China. And the tour guide said something like, we can talk about this outside the car, but when we're in the van, we can talk about whatever you want. I'll be honest with you and as open as I can be. And she answered her question and said, well, the government didn't allow it. Daughter, she's 6. She looked at her like, what do you mean they don't allow you? They control how many kids you can have. Like, what type of government would control? So I guess my point is, they had firsthand experience at really young ages that without YPO, I probably wouldn't have ever felt comfortable putting them in those scenarios. They have shaped and molded their lives. They had made them feel differently and been in situations that they never would have been in had I not had that extraordinary opportunity and experience for them to tag along. And they have friends all over the world. And it's so incredible when you're able to give a gift like that, that's not physical, to your children. And I guarantee you they all want to be YPOers when they grow up, because I see all the cool opportunities and things that they've been exposed to just as children of a YPOer.
Awesome. Those are really good stories. Thank you for sharing that. All right. Anything I didn't ask you that I should have?
I would just say, if anyone's out there that has never thought about joining a leadership organization, and of course, we're both extremely biased. We think YPO is the very, very best. And that's probably because it isn't just a business organization. It's about family and personal also, and the whole person. And I think if you're just growing from a business perspective, maybe that would be detrimental not to have the opportunity to grow holistically. but do something, because the top is lonely, and growing as a leader, even if you're just, you're on the senior leadership team or you're in the C-suite, go join Vistage. I don't look at the other organizations as competitors. I look at them as other organizations out there trying to create some semblance of what the members and the families in YPO have experienced. Everybody always says emulation is, the way that people show that they flatter you or show that they want to be like you. And Forum is that example. Every leadership organization out there has copied Forum, and Forum came from YPO. And it just goes to show you that if you have 8 to 10 people who are your personal and professional board of directors, you can become your best self.
Totally. That's great.
So I would say, just do it. Don't think about the money. Don't think about the time. Don't think about it. This has been your experience. Whatever you give, you get back tenfold.
Yes, 100%. It's an investment, and you definitely get a return. Elizabeth, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. I'm sure people can find you on LinkedIn if you're a YPO member, YPO Connect. But any other thing you'd share about how to connect with you?
Reach out. I'll respond. If I don't respond, I didn't get it.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for being on. It's been a great conversation. Can't thank you enough. As always, love these conversations, and I'm happy to share them. Everybody have a great day. Thanks. Thanks for listening to the Growth Fire podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.